The Deutsches Rotes Kreuz, DRK, or the German Red Cross, was founded in 1864 as a voluntary civil assistance organization. Later, it became nationwide and focused on social welfare. From early 1933, the focus on social welfare was over, and the DRK was expected to play a part in supporting the German armed forces in any future conflict. In the beginning of the war, women in Germany were not involved in the German army. Hitler opposed conscription of women, stating that Germany would not form any section of women grenade throwers or any corps of women snipers. However, with many men going to the front, women were placed in auxiliary positions within the army called Wehrmachtshelferinnen, or female army helpers. They participated mainly in administrative tasks, but several thousands of them became volunteer nurses in military health services such as field hospitals. Training for nurses centered in Berlin prior to and at the start of the war. Education requirements were established formally in 1938, requiring an education and formal training, including a statewide nursing exam. As the war progressed, the duration of their education was shortened, resulting in many undereducated women being thrust into the horror of a busy field hospital. In preparation for the war, a massive effort significantly increased the number of DRK nurses. The number of trainee nurses in the DRK rose by 50% until 1938, and the number of nurses designated for military service increased by 32%. In 1939, just prior to the start of the war, there were 14,600 fully qualified DRK nurses. But by 1943, this number grew to 93,000 nurses and lesser qualified nursing assistants. Even before the start of the war, the DRK began conducting medical courses for military service and trained nurses assistants who were intended for nursing in the hospital as soon as the DRK nurses were recalled for military service. In addition to voluntary, partly unskilled helpers, the DRK was responsible for all wartime nursing. This monopoly on nursing in the event of war was maintained until the fronts expanded in the years after 1940. The nursing personnel were mostly employed in conjunction with doctors and served jointly with members of the German Medical Corps. Officially, the nurses were subordinate to the military order. Within the military hierarchy, the management levels were divided into senior nurse, army or field superior, and general superior. Contrary to Allied nurses who were given membership to the armed forces, DRK nurses were commanded by the German army and could be held to military disciplinary measures, but were not given military status. The nursing staff mainly worked in the mobile or stationary military hospitals of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, or accompanied hospital trains. The locations covered all occupied areas and German front lines from Africa to Norway. The work in the military hospitals was very demanding right from the start. As the war progressed, nurses were required to go closer and closer to the front. This was an unusual concept, as German idealism prided femininity and the protection of safety of German women was praised. Necessity came from the Eastern Front, and nurses worked closely with the medical corps as well as forced laborers such as nurses and doctors from the occupied countries in which they were set up. There are records of German and Russian nurses working side by side, though not without strain and conflicts. Local populations were conscripted as assistants out of pure need and lack of fully trained medical personnel. Many prisoners of war were assigned to work in the hospitals due to a shortage of staffing, especially on the Eastern Front. The nurses were completely overwhelmed from the start of the war. The hygienic conditions and the supply of bandages and medicines were often poor. The occupancy of beds was insufficiently planned. In the years after 1940, the beds were double or quadruple overcrowded. In the course of the war, nurses from the occupied countries were also admitted to military service if they declared themselves German as foreigners. It is important to note that most of the women decorated with the Iron Cross Second Class during the war were Red Cross nurses. Courage and determination in the face of imminent danger allowed these women to commit acts of valor that are in no way second to soldiers' deeds. As a rule, the German army was followed by administrative and medical staff which employed a large number of women only after an area was secured. But in the later years of the war, when the Red Army gained large territories within weeks, there was simply no time to evacuate the nurses who worked relatively close to the front line. It means that many German women were captured and nothing good happened to them. They were victims of rape, sexual extortion, and forced prostitution and enslaved labor after the war.